This is my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Part 9, Chapter 1. I plan on reviewing every single chapter, so stick around on my channel and to see every single upload that I make. I want to start off by prefacing that I have not completed fully Part 8 of JoJo, so there's probably a lot of references and a lot of callbacks that I'm not going to understand nor get. But the cool thing is that this chapter does an excellent job at establishing the new setting, new characters, and most importantly, a new beginning? It seems as though this part kind of starts off as giving someone who has no idea what JoJo is a very good idea of what it's all about. As it shows a family tree, as it takes us to new protagonists in a new location, different from Japan, so nothing from Part 8 is transferring over as of right now. It seems as though our main character is a cousin of the protagonist of the last part, so that means that it's very easy for us to kind of get into it and to read it and to watch it. Now, let's start off by talking about our main characters first and foremost, before we move on to anything else. I absolutely love JoJo. His design, his attitude, how he talks, and how we get an insight into his thoughts throughout the chapter. We really get a sense of who this character is without even seeing too much of him. He honestly doesn't talk too much compared to the other characters in this chapter, but we definitely get an insight of his thoughts unlike anyone else. One thing I really love about our main character is that he's young, and the fact of he has not much experience. We only really get to understand and see him doing petty sort of crimes as transferring drugs through packages and not really saying any words or questioning it, which really isn't too much. And if you're a young kid, if you get, busted, it's no big deal, really. You might get juvie, but ultimately you're not going to be punished because you're still young and you don't know a thing or two. Which is really cool because we've seen every single other JoJo being quite a little bit older, around his age, but always older. This has to be the youngest Joestar, and I think it's so cool that we get to see him kind of have to learn the ropes from how he acts with others and how he's still his emotions are off the charts, especially with the freak out on the bus. We really get to see this young guy really become his own. It almost reminds me of young Joseph Joestar in Part 2. Now, let's talk about his stand, November Rain. The design's very interesting, and it's one that I think needs to grow on me. As of right now, I'm not the biggest fan of the weird spider creature and the whole fact of what it can do and what it can't do. It seems to be some sort of acidic rain or something of the sort. I don't know, but we're going to see in more chapters, and it's always going to change. At this point in JoJo, the stand always changes. It's not like how it was before where it would stay throughout its entire course like crazy diamond. Now it's going to change and evolve and move and alter and, get crazy. So I know that the starting point is interesting, but I want to throw a quick interesting theory. Just like in Part 7, we get kind of like an evolution of Johnny Joestar stand, Tusk, with his different acts. I think we're going to get a new November Rain every so often. I think it's going to evolve or change into something because having a spider-like stand design is not very typical of our protagonist. And I know that things are kind of being changed and different, but I truly believe that this isn't going to stay. Let's also talk about the other Joestar, Jargona. To be honest, I don't really know how to pronounce it, but for this point, I'm just going to say Jargona, as I think it really fits here. Honestly, such a badass character. The fact that it's our first, Joestar, in the bloodline that we can tell who is not, your typical Joestar, right? It's a boy who dresses femininely and has implants and is basically transgender. But now, JoJo keeps saying he and his bro, so I'm not sure if it's official, but so far it's just going to be that he's a male. But honestly, the fact of the gender doesn't really matter here, as I think it's just so cool that we see a character expressing themselves and being who they want to be, even though it's not a traditional standard of JoJo characters. You're either this big hulking guy or very feminine guy, or you're a girl. We don't really get to see too many times where things kind of um, get mixed in, and I think it's really cool. So Draguna's stand, Smooth Operators, is very interesting, as doesn't really quite have its potential laid out yet, as it rotates and turns objects that just, really doesn't seem to be that good in terms of power-wise, but could be used effectively. Like, what's the range of this? Can we turn whole doors? Can you shift walls? Can you a building by chance? The ground, can you turn it? Can you shift the ground and make it kind of feel like quicksand where it drags down since it's turning and shifting and moving? And there's a lot that we need to have answers on. I'm excited to read more about what this ability can do. So we definitely know it's going to be doing a lot of fighting. I wonder if it is combined with other stands to turn it into something really cool. And the design of it's pretty cool. It seems to be mechanical. Just like with a lot of these stands in part 8, a lot of it is mechanically based design-wise, which is interesting. I'm personally not the biggest fan of the shift and change, but to be honest, that's just what we need to see, right? Lastly, our last major character so far is Paco. Paco? Whatever. He seems to be an interesting character with a lot of personality, and having an axe for stealing is very interesting, and I think it's going to be really cool in this part. And he has a stand called the Hustlers, which is basically like a conveyor belt on his arms. I honestly think this stand is awful, but that's just my opinion. And maybe the more as the part goes on, we get to see things change. I have no idea. But as it stands right now, I think his stand is probably the least interesting stand I've ever seen, to be honest with you. I think it's very lame. Moving on to the setting of the part being in Hawaii, it's interesting that we're going back to America, as the only parts that have had America is part 6, 7, and now 9. And I think this topic is very interesting because we get to see varied locations, one being all throughout the U.S., one being in Florida, and one being in Hawaii. As this feels totally different from every single other part, and it feels so refreshing. Obviously, it seems like this part is a parallel universe to part 5 so far, with the whole characters and the setting, Dio being in the name and all, and his design being very closely similar to Giorno with the heart and the chest and other motifs like that. So I do think it is a parallel part to part 5, but it's still its own thing. It's just like borrows ideas. And the fact that we start off with this shot of the police really reminds me of how part 5 is, where we take place at the start of the airport. So Hawaii is a very interesting place to base this part on, because there's going to be a lot of islands and a lot of traveling, and it reminds me again of part 5, where at the start they start to sail out to go find that hidden treasure. So this is going to be something really cool and interesting to see. And honestly, I can't wait for all the tropical locales and locations, as one of my favorite places in part 3 was the fight with Judgment on that weird Pacific island that was just in the middle of nowhere, that has the quote-unquote Abdul's dad. Lastly, I just want to say that the flow of the paneling is absolutely amazing. Going from one page to the next, we really get a feel of this is Araki at his prime. Compared to anything else, how each panel goes, comedy, the timing, just everything, it's perfect. The action was smooth and fluid. Getting to know each character has been the best I've ever seen in any single part. This chapter is phenomenal. And to be honest, I give this chapter a full 10 out of 10, as it sets up for our next chapters, with the ending being so like, man, like, what are we getting ourselves into? Where are we going? How this is going to play out? We get a perfect introduction to the characters, perfect setup for later chapters, then our main plot of the story, cool stands with cool, interesting ideas, a little bit of backstory of our main character, this philosophy of mechanism. That's so cool and interesting, and I can't wait to see the rest. This is my review of Chapter 1 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Part 9, the JoJoLands.